just talk louder, quieter. It just happens sometimes.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. Okay. Hello and welcome back to the second party. I wanted to talk about incomplete or less than ideal statistics and how they can warp our perception of reality, as well as some ways we can think about them in an attempt to mitigate this. I want to start off by talking about an example that brought this to the forefront of my mind. So a little while back, maybe 2 or 3 months ago, I was out to eat with my wife and her family for someone's birthday at kind of a larger chain restaurant. And while I was previously pretty involved in the conversation, I started to become somewhat uninterested in what they were talking about, as they were talking about The Bachelorette, of all things.
Is it your favorite show, though?
Yeah, obviously. That was until somebody made a remark about how all of the remaining contestants, I think there were maybe 3 or 4, something like that, all of them happened to have a black father and a white mother.
Well, all the remaining contestants, and then the Bachelorette herself, too.
Yes, so highly critical there. And someone noted this in quite a surprised voice and asked the question, basically, what are the odds of that? And after thinking about this for a second or so, the conversation seemed to have died down. I commented something along the lines of, probably higher than you would think. I said this because I thought there were a number of variables that likely weren't being taken into consideration. For instance, the Bachelorette happens to have a black father and a white mother, as detailed earlier. People tend to be attracted to others like themselves, whether this be life experience, education level, or genetic makeup. So the likelihood that the remaining contestants would be biracial, particularly half black and half white, may be higher than people would initially expect, given the Bachelorette is as well. Regardless of these statistics, though, she may simply have a kind of quote-unquote type, as many in the dating world say. This could make her more attracted to, or more predisposed to be attracted to, someone who's half black and half white. Additionally, there's an underlying variable amongst all of these people, which is that they're all here because the Bachelorette wanted them to be around. Statistically speaking, in the US at least, black men marry white women more frequently than black women marry white men. In fact, black males marrying white American females is the second most common interracial marriage in the US, where 8.5% of black American men were married to a white spouse compared to 3.9% of black American women who were married to a white spouse in 2010. As a result, the likelihood that the remaining contestants would all have a black father and a white mother is not as small as one would initially think.
Well, it's higher than that they would have a black mother and a white father, right?
Correct. So you can start off by saying the likelihood that all the people that remain are half black and half white is informed by her making the decision to keep people around. This could be because they have similar life experiences. This could be she's physically attracted to people like that. It could be that she is looking for someone like her father, right? Or like her mother, or someone who exemplifies what she's seen growing up, right? Plenty of people have that in their lives. So that informs whether or not these people would have the racial makeup that they do. And then on top of that, when you look at the statistics, I think if you add it up, it's probably, the likelihood that someone who is half black and half white has a black father and a white mother is almost twice as likely, or more than twice as likely, as having a white father and a black mother.
You look at like these Bachelorette shows, and like a lot of times I feel ashamed that I know this because I've watched enough of this show. I'm not proud to say, but when you get to the final few, like very often you can tell the person has a type. So
sure,
the likelihood that the final few look similar, not always, but that's not just chance. So there's that. But then it's also on top of that, okay, when you do have those people who all look a similar, racial makeup or whatever, then the chance that that would be black father, white mother is actually higher than the other way around. So there's like two levels of, you think that maybe on the surface this looks like, oh wow, just a random chance thing that happened. But no, there are actually factors behind the scenes that are making that more likely.
Yeah. And I'm not necessarily asserting that there's an easy way to quantify this, because I'm sure the Bachelorette, right, if she found Mr. Perfect and Mr. Perfect didn't happen to have, I don't know, insert physical characteristic here that she wanted, she very well still may end up with him. But the likelihood that she is going to end up with someone that fits into a specific type does affect things.
Well, and on top of that, you could even say the producers who put on the show, when they're going out and picking people to be on her season, there's also a level of selection, and they're already picking a number of people who fit maybe the kind of criteria that she'd be looking for. I mean, I don't know how behind the scenes of these shows work, but I have to assume that you tell them some things about what you want, and they always throw in the random people for the drama, right? I almost am convinced that those people are like paid actors to go and like just stir up stuff on these shows. But it's also, but the point that I'm making is all the people that you start with as potential suitors is also not just a random sampling of the population. Like there's some selection that goes into that too.
Sure. I don't know that that selection necessarily applies in this specific case, given the comments were about like parental ethnic makeup. But yeah, to your point.
Well, I think it does, because that season of the show, there were a lot of people who were black or biracial with black.
Okay.
Like a lot of people, more than you would see in the general population. So I'm saying you're already like, you have that has been selected from this pool.
I wonder if they sit down and talk with the contestant and say, oh, okay, what's your type? What are you looking for? Maybe they do. Right. Maybe they don't. But either way.
I feel like there's probably some level of that. But either way, like, you go out and pick 4 random people from the general public, and the chances that all those 4 people are going to have a black father and a white mother is pretty low. But that's not what we're saying here, because we have to understand the setup and the chances that all of those 4 people now have similar ethnic makeups and and backgrounds. That is a completely different equation than 4 random people in the population.
Yeah. So that's why at the beginning I basically said, if you remember, I didn't necessarily say, oh, it's wildly likely. I just said more likely than you would initially think.
Probably more likely than you're thinking, especially if you're being this surprised by it.
Because there are a number of underlying variables that make the initial assumption incomplete. So I think, you need to look at those underlying variables, especially when they're not random. In this case, human preference plays a role, and that on top of population statistics. So ultimately, if we can draw a line between the Bachelorette's preferences or genetic societal statistics, we can better understand the true likelihood of something like this occurring. You may not be able to quantify that still, but you can begin to guesstimate in your head and understand that it's maybe more likely than you were originally anticipating. As a generalized rule, I think people tend to see themselves as kind of the exception to rules in statistics. I've noticed this in a number of different circumstances. People believe that something is like wildly unlikely or wildly likely without taking into account all of the variables. I kind of have a rule for myself when I'm looking at statistics that essentially goes, assume that you are average or slightly less favorable unless you have evidence and data that says otherwise that can clearly be factored into the equation. Yep. And then you can begin to factor that in. So like if there are variables that I can factor in, I try and do that to get a better picture of things to be able to act accordingly. But that being said, there are obviously a number of instances where we have additional data and we don't want to factor it into the equation as well. I've been thinking and kind of noticing how people see themselves as the exception for a while, but the solidification and kind of expression of that idea, I think, was assisted by a humorous and pretty blunt movie that actually happened to be a rom-com of all things called He's Just Not That Into You.
Oh, great movie. Great movie.
Yeah. I think it's pretty funny. As rom-coms go, it's a pretty
I'm not a
solid one.
Romance movie person.
Yeah, me neither.
That is a great movie.
I think it's great because it's humorous, but also representative of reality, and you don't have to suspend too much disbelief. I think that makes it really great.
So how does that relate to the stats thing?
Sure. So there's one scene in particular where a male character, Alex, is listening to a female character named Gigi talk about her date with a third-party guy who didn't call her back. And she hypothesizes a number of different reasons for this, ranging from the guy losing her number to him even getting hit by a cab. And Alex retorts with the most likely scenario that, put simply, the guy just didn't want to see her again.
He's just not that into you.
Yeah, as kind of the movie name. And Gigi's really taken aback by this and retorts by describing a friend in a similar situation that did end up marrying the guy that didn't call back. And Alex kind of concludes by saying that the friend was an exception and that it's dumb to believe in that and put stock in the exception. One should recognize what the rule is. In this particular case, he's saying that if a guy doesn't call you, it's because he doesn't want to call you. And we should apply this to ourselves. Alex is suggesting that we recognize what the rule is and not expect to be that exception.
Right, because realistically, you probably aren't the exception to the rule.
And true to that, the movie kind of poetically follows a number of people, and only maybe 1 in a dozen ends up as the kind of quote-unquote exception to a given lesson or rule. All of the other people follow the exact rule, and what you would think should happen, given all of the evidence and variables that you see leading up, is exactly what happens.
What happens most often.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's part of what, that's kind of what I was talking about earlier, where I think the movie's representative of reality.
Yeah.
I think, we kind of have to apply that same logic to statistics, like in the absence of additional data that can be factored in, we should just assume that we're average, or as Alex kind of says, we're the rule, not the exception. Mm-hmm. I think initially people hear something like that and they'll think it's kind of depressing seeming, especially since a lot of statistics can spell the kind of doom and gloom for us. But at the same time, like you said, it can be really freeing. I think it can help you kind of lower your expectations. If you expect to be, like the captain of the football team and the coolest guy in school, you're going to be let down when you barely make varsity and have some friends. But if you recognize that the average person isn't on varsity at all, you'll be ecstatic when you make it rather than disappointed as you would have in the first circumstance, right?
Well, yeah, that's kind of like the rule with placing gold, silver, bronze, right? Have you heard
Yeah.
this? The
Yeah.
The happiest person is actually the one who places bronze. That's what people say. Because those people sit here and they go
they're grateful just to be there.
I was almost not even here.
Yeah.
Versus, for example, the people who play silver are I was almost first place.
Almost there, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure that varies if the gap between first and second is massive, right? If there's some blowout like Shaun White on the half pipe or Michael Phelps in some of those races, but yeah.
Seen some of Michael Phelps' races?
Okay,
there was
the
classic
one
that's like a 1/10 of a second or something.
I thought it was a one hundredth of a second
like that,
he won
yeah.
by. Yeah, that's crazy, but
yeah.
Yeah. I think the other thing that looking at statistics like that can do, how it can kind of free you, is it allows you to take action. Once you've accepted that maybe some negative statistic applies to you, you can try and take action to better things for yourself. It can actually result in increased likelihood of good things or decreased likelihood in bad things if you're able to take some kind of positive action on something. So instead of just sitting by the wayside helplessly thinking that you're doomed or you're totally fine, you can actually look at things and increase your chances of whatever you want to have happen. Like for instance, in 2020, the divorce rate was approximately 42%. However, the divorce rate for second marriages is 60% and 73% for third marriages. And since the first statistic of 42% was for divorce generally, if it's your first marriage, the probability is actually significantly lower than the initial 42%. So if you're going into your first marriage, you shouldn't really be looking at, just an overall divorce rate of 42%, because it's actually less than that. And there are a bunch of other factors that you should also understand when going into things, so that you can understand how a statistic applies to you more precisely.
Well, there's, isn't it true that, like, for example, if you don't cohabitate before you're married, the marriage has a higher likelihood, statistically speaking, of success if success is defined by not getting a divorce?
Yes, so that my understanding is that that's right. I was not able to readily find the data on that, probably because unlike the marriage number, that's not something that's 100% reliable to record. So for instance, I think
probably has to be self-reported. You can't just
Yeah.
look at government like marriage data or whatever.
Yeah. Versus something like income, that can be told with a 100% certainty from the government. So, in that case, with income, couples with annual income of more than $50,000 a year have a divorce rate as much as 30% lower when compared to those with a household income lower than $25,000 a year. And this makes sense because one of the most cited contributing reasons for divorce is money fights and money problems, as Dave Ramsey puts it, or that 59% of Americans who have gotten divorced within the past 5 years said finances played a role in their divorce. So you can sit there and go, well, the more money you have, the less you're going to be concerned about it and the fewer fights you're going to have. But also at the same time, if you and your spouse can be on the same page with money, then the likelihood of divorce can go down. So in this case, actionable things you could do are you could work really hard to get your income up, and you can work on communicating with your spouse regarding money so that you're on the same page and not having those fights. And once you know that factors into the statistics, then you can take action. But if you don't know that, you can't necessarily take action on that thing. Kind of tied to the financial side is actually education. If you're more educated, the likelihood of divorce goes down significantly. For instance, obtaining a bachelor's degree can lower your divorce rate by as much as 25%.
Yeah, maybe this should be prefaced with all of these they're correlated. These are not shown to have causational relations.
Correct.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of these, and you can debate on each one individually, but I think a fair amount of these, at least, one can reason as to why this is the case. So, for instance, when you're going through a bunch of tough times and you're not knowing where your next meal is going to be coming from, or you're having to move frequently because you're not in a stable home environment, that's going to put more stress on people. The more stress you put on people, the more stress it puts on a relationship. The more stress is put on a relationship over long periods of time, generally speaking, the more people are going to fight. The more people are going to fight, generally speaking, the more frequently they're going to get divorced with, if they're married people.
So, in this example of marriage or divorce rates, what would you say about, like, my grandma has been married twice, and she has been divorced twice. Her second divorce took place when my mom was a kid. So I have never known my grandma, married. And ever since that divorce, she has remained single. And
Yeah. Okay.
I've talked to her about this before. And, I mean, statistically speaking, like, if she's had 2 divorces, right, her third marriage is way more likely to result in a divorce than someone who's, going into their first marriage.
Sure. So no other factors considered. The
right.
likelihood of divorce there was 73%.
Right. And that's not to say that, in her specific instance, there's
Correct.
a 73% chance of divorce.
Correct. But no other things known.
No other things known, right. So I've asked her about this or talked to her about it before, and she has said things to me like, yeah, I'm clearly not very good at picking men. And
So,
she has basically ever since then, my understanding is she's kind of been like, okay, clearly I'm not great at this. So she hasn't really pursued that ever since. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of factors that go into that. But I also sit here and wonder if she's sitting here going like, I have a low success rate at this, statistically speaking, and based on
she has a 0% success rate with that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So is that an example of someone saying like, okay, I'm trying to look at myself based on the past and say, yeah, maybe I got to make a decision based on that. I'm not going to try this again.
So I think in that instance, she's recognized that there is a problem, and in a way, she's taken an action to resolve that problem, as in the problem being an inability to find or pick a partner that results in a successful marriage.
Yeah, I should also say both of the people she has married have turned out to have some issues. Okay. So that's part of what led her, I guess, to the conclusion of clearly I'm not able to pick a good guy.
So I think that is a correct conclusion, that clearly I'm not able to pick a good guy, right? You have two instances of this, and you're getting married. This is a very serious decision, and even if you marry someone and it goes absolutely terribly, I think it's worth assessing and looking back and at least asking yourself, not trying to not victim blaming here, but you're looking back and you're going, okay, even if they totally duped me, right? They were just lying to me the whole time. Well, there's something good about at least knowing, taking that first step and understanding that you are someone who can be duped that easily and trying to do something about it. It sounds like her solution, if you want to call it that, is to just not get married again. And if you don't get married, you can't get divorced from the non-existent marriage. So that's a solution. I don't know that that's the solution or necessarily what I would advise for someone. If it works for her and she's happy with it, then wonderful.
I mean, I guess it's situation dependent.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I mean, it's situational.
I guess my question is that an example of what you're talking about, where maybe you can look at the factors as they most closely relate to you and make a decision based on the more likely scenario? She's sitting here saying, well, I've had 2 divorces, so the likelihood that it's going to fail again is probably higher than the general population that you said had a chance of divorce or likelihood of divorce less than 42% or whatever it was.
Sure.
Is that an example of what you're talking about? I guess that's my question.
So I think kind of. I think you're factoring in one additional variable, right? Because initially we're starting out at the divorce rate is X. I think it was 42%. Okay. Mm-hmm. And you're factoring in your additional variable of either A, I've been divorced once and it goes up to something like 60%, or B, I've been divorced twice, so I would be going to my third marriage and the divorce rate then is 73%. Okay, so you're factoring in one more variable. So that's a step in the right direction, at least in terms of factoring in additional information. The one thing I would say is you can continue to factor in additional information. You don't need to stop there necessarily. So, and I think that's maybe why those are so high. Does that make sense? So what I'm saying there is, I think part of the reason that the statistics for divorce rate increase as the number of divorces that one has gone through increase, I think that part of that is because by and large, it seems like most people are not assessing properly what went wrong the first time and resolving it the second time. So you mentioned with your grandma, oh, well, it didn't go well with both of these guys. And it didn't go well with both of them in the same general fashion, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you've failed, but you failed in the same way, if you can understand specific to you in what way you failed, and when I say failed, I mean failed to select someone without that trait, if you can understand what that is and alter that, that would be even better,
Yeah.
right?
Sure.
So, for instance, if you were always marrying someone who was an alcoholic, and then you were getting divorced because they cheated on you when they were drinking all the time, or they had a temper when they were drinking, or they weren't great around your kids when they were drinking, right? The underlying factor is you are dating or going after people who are alcoholics. And I'm not saying that there aren't alcoholics that don't hide things well, but I think that if you're about to marry someone and you look at them highly critically, and maybe you ask a second set of eyes to come in and go, is this person an alcoholic? You can kind of figure that out. Now, I'm not saying that this is the answer, but you could swing the absolute other way and marry someone who doesn't drink alcohol whatsoever. Right? And I'm not saying that that solves all of the problems and now everything's going to be perfect. Perhaps you introduce a whole nother set of problems. But at least we're not doing the same thing as before when the fundamental issue was this person is an alcoholic.
So going back to the thing you were saying about people believing or acting under maybe the hope that they will be the exception to the rule kind of thing. Like,
Yeah.
Is that not what people do when they buy a lottery ticket?
Yeah.
Right? Like,
that's exactly what they're doing when they're
someone
buying a lottery
has to,
ticket.
like, I've heard people say this, like, well,
Someone has to win.
Someone has to win,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, so that's thinking you're the exception to the rule. I mean,
Well, and it's not necessarily thinking you are, but it's you're making a decision based on, like, maybe you want to call it like a blind hope that
no,
you could be.
you are valuing the likelihood that you are the exception higher than the statistics show.
Okay.
So, for instance, if we're going back to the example of marrying someone who's an alcoholic, okay, maybe the first time you thought, I can change this person and make them better, right? And then they'll be just wonderful. And then it doesn't work, and then they get divorced. And then they go into the second marriage thinking, oh, well, I can change this the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, based on past behavior, no.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, no, you're not going to be able to change that without some other thing coming into the mix here, generally speaking.
Right. So how do you account for just having a willingness to maybe take risks? Because I think we can also sit here and we can find it admirable when, certain people take risks that are unlikely, and you hear stories where, like, okay, yeah, it paid off greatly, right? Like people who invested all their life savings in this business, and, like, that's a risk, right? And statistically speaking, how many of small businesses fail?
Yeah.
I don't know if it's more than 50%. I guess I don't know.
Whatever.
The stats.
It's a lot.
But we can still look at someone who did that and then, found success if their business takes off and, like, it became a huge thing or whatever.
Yeah. So
Elon Musk, who, sold PayPal or whatever, made millions, billion? I don't know how much. A boatload of cash.
yeah, millions.
Then took it all and, like, went into debt or something to start Tesla.
Tesla and SpaceX.
And SpaceX. Like,
number
that
of those
is
things,
one
yeah.
hell of a risk.
Yeah.
But we look back at it now and we see that and they're like, and we go, oh my gosh, like, that is so admirable. Like, he built this thing, went through all these risks, and we look at that and that's a warm, fuzzy story in our hearts, right? Kind of like
Yeah.
the whole thing going back to the movie. Yeah, we look at the one guy who didn't call back and it happened to work out and they had this amazing love story, and we look back and we think, oh, warm fuzzy, and everyone wants that, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know what the answer is here, but clearly there are people who take those risks, go against what should be the normal expected, and it pays off. So I don't think
So
that
what
you should
exactly?
never do that.
No. So this is not at all contrary to what I'm asserting. What I'm asserting is understand the variables and take the risk accordingly. So, for instance, I don't know the statistic, maybe I'll look it up in a minute, but an unbelievably high amount of small business restaurants fail.
Right.
Okay? Now, I'm not crazy heavily invested into the small business restaurant side of things. Okay? But I imagine what you could do is look at a bunch of small business restaurants that failed and understand some of the things at least that made them fail. And then look at the few that succeeded and understand what it is exactly that made those businesses succeed. Maybe it's
Sure.
location, maybe it's the type of food, maybe it's a price point. I don't know what it is here. Maybe it's just a way of managing finances and attracting the right people. I don't know. But what you can do is gather additional information and try and mitigate some of those pitfalls. So, and I'm just spitballing this, but in the case of Tesla, okay, I think a big reason why Tesla, as a new startup American car company that actually made it was something like a startup American car company had not gone big and actually made it in like 100 plus years when Tesla made it, okay? Well, part of what you can look at there is you can say, well, you're trying to come into a market with a bunch of established players. There are a bunch of dealership locations, and manufacturing these things is... So let's say manufacturing something like an engine is like, this is a highly complicated, highly complex thing that is only getting more complicated, more complex, more precise, and requires more investment over time. Okay, so for a startup to have all of those incurred costs, to hope that this engine works, to hope that they can have some form of dealership network and convince people to purchase this car, like, that's this crazy long shot, and the probability of that succeeding is crazy low. Well, what you can do is you can, like, if you truly understand all of those, or at least some of those underlying variables, you can look at them and try and alter it. So in the
Okay.
case of Tesla, they, A, don't have traditional dealership structures. B, they're not manufacturing the same kind of thing that's highly complicated, highly complex, and has a bunch of industry knowledge like an engine. They're saying, we're doing electric cars. Okay, so now you're competing in a different space. You're changing the paradigm. You're being a disruptor in the market.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. So you're not necessarily saying, "Oh, we should look at the statistics of what is most likely," or look at ourselves as, well, we're most likely average, which means we're most likely not going to succeed in this thing. Like, rather than looking at it like that way, let's use the statistic as a tool almost to dig into it and say, well, if this is something that I'm serious about, how can I dig into the factors or variables that play into my chance for success, and try to analyze what might help me achieve a desired goal. Not necessarily just to look at the statistic of how I might just be average and say, well, screw it. Like,
Yeah,
maybe you alter your expectations slightly, but also you sit here and use it as a tool to
yeah,
try and help you achieve an expected result.
yeah, exactly. So if we want to go back to, we'll maybe do some spoilers for He's Just Not That Into You. Okay, so one of the couples, they've been living together, and the dude doesn't want to get married, and the chick decides actually she does want to get married. Okay, and she doesn't want to just sit around kind of playing house with him. She wants to actually get married. Okay, and she basically asks him, okay, well, when are we going to get married? He's like, yeah, we're not going to get married. Okay. And what he means by we're not going to get married is we're not going to get married. So at some point in the movie, she takes him seriously with that. And she says, I want to get married. This dude doesn't want to get married. So I need to leave. So then she leaves. Mm-hmm. Okay. Because the probability of you getting married to a dude who doesn't want to get married to you, when he's told you, I don't want to get married to you, is wildly, crazily, unbelievably low. When she leaves, he realizes, shoot, I care more about having her in my life, and it forces him to reassess getting married. Mm-hmm. And then what happens is he comes back and he proposes to her. So what she's done is she's looked at the landscape. Let's just say the probability of getting married in that circumstance is 20%. And the probability of just cohabitating for the rest of their lives is 80%. Well, what she's doing is she's going, well, those odds suck. Am I willing to accept the 20% or potentially leave and try and find what I actually want? She leaves, and he comes back because he's forced to reevaluate the situation. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to happen in every single circumstance, but she can take an action once she understands the true statistics given a situation. So previously, she was probably looking around, oh, this friend's getting married, this friend's getting married, this friend's getting married. Okay, well, those friends, their husbands didn't say, I don't want to get married. Her significant other did say that. So once she realizes that and actually takes him at his word that when he says, I don't want to get married, he means I don't want to get married, then you can actually make decisions. So only after she accepts and understands the statistics is she able to make a decision, take action to increase the probability of getting what she wants.
Not necessarily with that guy, even though that's how it ended up. But
correct. But what she wants is to be married.
To go say, if it's not going to be you, then like it's not going to work. And she's trying to.
And you can debate whether like you should or shouldn't, or if you agree with her or whatever. But like that's what she wants. When she's able to assess that, only then can she make a proper decision. So what I'm suggesting is whether it be the restaurant case or the Tesla case or whatever is out there, okay? Understand what you're getting into from a statistical standpoint. Understand how certain variables affect things. Alter and modify the variables to increase the likelihood that you are going to succeed, mm-hmm. and then proceed. Like we had a friend who was talking about wanting to own an ice cream shop of sorts. Okay, and he had kind of pondered ideas of an ice cream coffee shop, small town, little thing. And I said, or I knew.
He talked about this all the time.
He talked about it a lot. And I knew that, well, a lot of small businesses fail. And guess what? Restaurants are crazy high on that list. So what I suggested is, well, why don't you start by doing kind of a food truck or pulling something in a trailer and going to baseball games and outings and kids' birthday parties and things like that. Or maybe even get a cart that you're pushing around and go to large baseball tournaments and try and sell custom ice cream there, right? And then you get an understanding of what kind of ice cream people actually like. And you can talk to people and basically do massive group studies as to what people are actually looking into, because maybe people want a small spot where they're able to sit down and drink coffee and get ice cream all day and they can work at a spot. Or maybe they just want to walk into the restaurant, get some food, and leave. You don't know which one. But when you gather additional data, when you understand what people want, when you understand how likely it is for a business to fail, you can alter things. So start off small, right? Maybe a lot of the reason that these businesses fail is they don't get enough customers coming in soon enough. Well, if you already have a customer base from walking around with a cart and you let everyone know that you're opening up a restaurant, you could mitigate that issue. If you already have people who love the ice cream, you mitigate that issue. If the problem was that when people open these restaurants, they don't have their recipes perfected, You could mitigate that issue by perfecting your recipes when you're walking around in your cart. Once the recipe is perfected, then you open up the store. So the more you understand about a specific statistic and how different variables affect it, the more you can use and alter those variables in your particularized case to increase your chances of success. And I'm suggesting...
Or to try and help things go
more smoothly.
How you are wanting them to go.
Yeah. And I'm suggesting that no matter what it is that your goal is, that instead of just idealizing a situation where everything goes perfectly for you, that you should put in the work, understand what you could do better, or understand how you could increase your chances of success, and then proceed forward, making whatever modifications are necessary.
Well, and interestingly, in this instance with this friend, like you had kind of said to him, like, hey, you talk about this all the time. Like, it seems like you're really passionate about this. Like, what are you doing to, like, help this be a reality? And you kind of started probing him with these questions and, like, look, I want to see you succeed. Like, if this is your dream,
I do.
I want to see it happen. Like, what are you doing? You kind of pushed him, like, what are your next steps? And he was like, you know what? Yeah, I need to, like, do some research. I need to whatever and all this stuff. And that kind of forced him to start looking into it. And interestingly enough, in this instance, he came back not too long after, maybe a couple months later, and it was like, yeah, I decided I actually don't want to do it. So maybe that wasn't actually what he wanted.
Yeah, and I think, you know, a lot of times people don't just necessarily idealize the statistics, but they also idealize the thing itself. Right? They don't understand the amount of work that goes into it. And maybe part of what diving into like those less than ideal statistics and understanding what modifications you would need to make, you begin to clarify your plan of action, your ultimate goal even. You know, I think if you've kind of balked at some of these examples, particularly surrounding marriage, you know, saying they're, you know, not terribly concrete, or that it's correlation rather than causation, like we were talking about a little bit earlier. I think in some cases that's a fair argument, but in other cases, like I said, there's a relatively straightforward case, I think. But we can also talk about heavily concrete examples. For instance, the probability of contracting chickenpox is about 90% if you come in contact with someone who has it. That seems particularly alarming, especially if you know of someone, anyone really, that has chickenpox. Like, that sounds like it's going to spread like crazy. However, you know, this is specifically for those who are not vaccinated against chickenpox. If we're looking at a particular individualized case of someone and they have been vaccinated for chickenpox, then the probability goes down by over 90%. So your probability of contracting chickenpox is unbelievably low if you've been vaccinated from it. Well, if you haven't, your probability, if you're around someone who has it, it's like 90%. That's a massive differential, right? When we factor in that additional data of the individualized case where the person's vaccinated, especially when we know that in this case there's a level of causation, we have a better understanding of the actual risks that we're looking at. You know, you may have initially worried about contracting chickenpox, but if you've received the chickenpox vaccination, then you wouldn't be worried after. But like an even more stark example, let's take prostate cancer, for example. Over 6% of people will get prostate cancer at some point in their lifetime.
People?
So this may be pretty alarming for someone, but that's an incomplete statistic. If you're a woman, you can't get prostate cancer. You don't need to worry about it. Men have a 13% chance of contracting prostate cancer in their lifetime. So if you're a woman looking at the first statistic with no knowledge, you don't know anything else about that. You just hear cancer and 6% of the population. You could be concerned about something. But after looking at it, digging deeper, understanding the individualized case, your concerns basically go to zero.
Right.
But too often people look at these kind of like incomplete statistics and they come to incorrect conclusions that could hurt them. Two things can be true at once. Don't think you're the exception and assume that you're the average or slightly below unless you have evidence and data to say otherwise. And Statistics are here to represent an amalgamation of, well, generally, a large, wide, and diverse group of people, but you are not that. You are one person with a clearly definable and measurable trait. Attributing a group statistic to you is an okay starting point, but shouldn't be the final conclusion. You should take things into account as well and arrive at a personalized likelihood of probability. Mm-hmm. This will allow you to really assess the true potential risk and take meaningful actions as a result of this increased knowledge. And we talked about this earlier, whether that's starting a car company or looking at a particular virus or starting a restaurant business, anything out there.
Yeah, so I don't know if this is like pulling us like off track from... I think this is somewhat related, but maybe going in a slightly different direction, talking about statistics being misleading or incomplete. Like, yeah, I agree with everything you just said. That makes sense to me. I think sometimes people can not only misunderstand statistics or read them incorrectly, like you can have people who are using statistics to try and doctor a specific viewpoint or impression by people.
Sure.
Like people can be purposely using a statistics to mislead people to believe a certain thing. Like you can find a statistic to quote unquote prove anything.
Yeah, I mean, you can doctor things in certain ways so that it sounds radically different.
Right.
98% survival rate versus 2% death rate.
Right.
These ring,
I mean,
at least on, like, I think if you are more mathematically minded, you translate them and it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But at least the initial impact is radically different between the two.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot, like, in my mind, whenever I hear statistics, like, my mind immediately goes to, like, I want to understand everything that went into how they got that statistic so that I understand exactly how maybe accurate or reliable it is.
Sure.
Because there are so many ways that statistics can be incomplete, nefariously, or based on maybe just lack of thoroughness in your study.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like,
I don't know if this is going a different direction than what you were...
No, it's interesting. So I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm addressing the individualized case, like one person, right?
Yeah.
And you're addressing the, like, kind of mid-tier case where we're not talking about all of the population. We're talking about, and so we're not talking about all the population, and we're not talking about an individual. We're talking about some group. So in the example earlier, maybe we're talking about, like in the prostate cancer example, right? It's not helpful to say 6% of the population is going to get prostate cancer at some point in their lifetime. It is helpful to say 13% of the male population will get prostate cancer in their lifetime. And I kind of brought that up as an individualized case in the event that someone was a woman. But you're saying you want to understand other underlying variables to be able to apply it to smaller groups.
Maybe. What I'm saying is I hear that statistic and my mind goes, how was that gathered? And what went into that statistic?
Because was the sample group 10 people or...
or, are people factored into that? Is that all living males? Like, where are we talking about? Are we talking about in the U.S. or are we talking about in the world, first of all?
Yeah.
Did they pull that from all living males? So any male, say it's a U.S. study, any male in the U.S. study who was ever alive, had a social security number or whatever, they count as one person in that study? Or are you factoring out maybe people who died before the age of 20?
Sure.
Because you could say, men who make it to the age of 20, like that's a different statistic. The likelihood's going to go up then.
I mean, let's say maybe make it to 60, because I think that's where it's really going to come in. But yes, I understand the sentiment there.
But I sit here and I go, what went into that statistic? Because I have seen lots of examples where statistics are actually misleading or incomplete in that they seem to be projecting something that is not actually solid if you dig deep into it. And that can happen in a number of ways. Like statistics can be manipulated or not manipulated. Statistics can be faulty in like different ways. A few different ways. Like they can be faulty in A, how the data was gathered to produce that statistic, so the collection of the data. It could be in B, how that data is parsed up or analyzed.
Yeah.
What tools you use to analyze the data that you've gathered. Or it could be C, in how you choose to present that data.
Yeah.
And all of those things can make it say something like different than maybe it seems.
Yeah.
So like a classic example of this is, have you heard of the Colgate? You know, the Colgate statistic?
Is this like 1 in every 9
Okay,
dentists?
so there was a statistic. Yeah, so there was a statistic that Colgate put in one of their ad campaigns. I don't know when this was, but it said more than 80% of dentists recommend Colgate. That's what they said, and they put it out. So
more than 80% of dentists recommend Colgate. Okay, so this is the first time you're just bringing this up, but I guess I'll try and go through your thing. So the first thing is, how many dentists and what dentists were we talking to gain this, right? Did we sit down and talk to 10 dentists, or did we talk to 10,000 dentists?
How were the dentists selected?
That's the first question.
Yeah.
The second, how were they selected? And then also, I would say, what does recommend mean? Because
Sure.
you could say, oh, recommend implies some kind of comparison, right? Are you recommending it over all other kinds of toothpaste, or are you recommending it over not using toothpaste?
Right.
Because that's a big difference.
Right.
Okay, so
Yeah.
talk to me about what actually presumably
basically,
came out.
they, I think, came under fire for this, in a sense, or people kind of debunked this, in a sense, because they looked into it and they realized that what actually happened was dentists, in this study they did, were given a series of options of toothpaste to select that they recommended, and Colgate was one of several. So
they
Colgate
could have
was
checked
one
the
of,
box of...
Right. So Colgate was one of several toothpastes that doctors suggested, that 80% suggested.
So putting it into words, it's really that 80 whatever percent of dentists approve of the use of Colgate.
Sure.
Trying to put it more into plain English.
So they could have selected 5 toothpastes and said, I recommend these 5.
Sure.
And that person counts as a dentist who recommends Colgate.
Sure.
But the way that they phrased it, or the way they presented this data, made you think on initial read
that it was
the average
recommended over
person
everything else.
Makes it think that 80% of dentists are recommending that as like the primary best brand. But that is not that's not how the data was collected.
Well, the other thing that you could say is 15%, or let's just say 15%. 15% of dentists think that you shouldn't use Colgate.
Right.
Right, because presumably they didn't check to recommend it.
Right.
Right, like that reads totally different when you flip it.
Right. Yeah, so I feel like that's an example of how you present or communicate out your data, that can alter the perception of it. And that means a very different thing than what the original statistic would make you think. Like, that's something to consider.
I think sometimes it's more straightforward, like X% of marriages end in divorce, X% of second marriages end in divorce.
Right. Some things are more easily able to be kind of cut and dry.
And in the Colgate example, right, we're not applying it to an individualized case. We're not trying to understand whether or not one dentist recommends Colgate. We're trying to understand whether or not a patient should use Colgate.
Right.
Right? So it's more of a group. This is what I was talking about before, where most of my examples, I'm talking about applying a statistic to an individualized case. And I think what you're talking about here is applying a statistic to a group.
Right. So maybe it's probably a little bit flip side of what you were talking before, but I think it follows the same type of theme of how statistics can be maybe misinterpreted.
Yeah, or misleading.
Or not, misleading, or not properly analyzed how they should be. So, like...
Sure. I think
there's
the other
a lot
difference,
that goes into it.
I think the other difference is, in your case, with the Colgate thing, and maybe someone would disagree with me, but it seems like a somewhat nefarious example where you're trying to doctor a response versus in the divorce rate, whatever. I don't think that most of the time people are attempting to doctor a response. I think it's just that number's out there.
Yeah, or, okay, so here's another example. You've heard the story with the World War II planes, right?
Oh,
that
yeah.
Came...
So, the fundamental lesson or understanding is of survivorship bias.
Right. So in that instance, what it was these, World War II, these planes in World War II, they kept coming back. Was it the British Army? I don't know. Kept losing all these planes. And they kept getting shot down.
Yeah.
And so they started taking a look at all the planes that they had gotten that weren't shot down.
Yeah,
that
they start
had come
analyzing
back, and they
where
start
they had been
analyzing
shot.
where are they getting shot, and they kind of map it out where the most likely places are getting shot. And so they start reinforcing those areas because
Where the planes were
those
shot.
areas are getting shot a lot. So we need to reinforce those areas.
Yeah.
But that did not solve their problem.
Well, it actually did the opposite.
Yeah.
More planes got shot down.
Well, did it? I don't know about that.
Yeah, they did.
Okay. Because the problem was they did not consider the fact that all the planes that they were checking where the bullet holes were planes that had not gotten shot down.
Yeah, they made it
So
back at
they
least.
survived getting shot in those places. And actually the places that needed reinforcing
were
the places
opposite, where
that those
weren't
didn't
shot.
have bullet holes in them.
Yeah.
Because the planes that got shot there did not come back.
Yeah.
So there was a bias in the sample size that they were picking. You could also think about if you're doing some kind of maybe self-reported study about
Introversion versus extroversion.
Yeah, introversion versus extroversion, or personalities, or I don't know, something along those lines.
Personality of some kind.
You should consider maybe a bias in your population of
who's signing up.
Who is more likely to, or maybe you're conducting your study in person, in a focus group where you're in a room with, 10, 15 people about introversion and extroversion. Well, who's more likely to be willing to sign up and spend 3 hours on a Saturday afternoon in a room with 15 strangers talking to them? Probably not an introvert.
Yeah.
So you have a bias in your sample size there.
Yeah.
Right. Or not your sample size. You have a bias in your population that you're pulling data from.
In your sample population, yeah.
And that makes a big difference.
Yeah.
I saw this example on Twitter not too long ago, but there was a poll from CBS that they put out, and the question that they asked was verbatim, what happened at the Capitol on January 6th, 2021? Okay? That was the question they asked. And there were polling people who were Republicans, people who were Democrats, and people who were like independent, I think. Okay? And the options, it was a multiple choice survey. Okay? So the options that you could select from, there were 4. There was A, it was an insurrection. B, it was an attempt to overthrow the government. C, it was patriotism. Or D, it was defending freedom.
I'd just like to say, those are 2, at least in my mind, regardless of regardless of how you would describe it, I think that most people can agree that there are essentially 2 options there.
Exactly.
And they're basically polar opposites.
Right. So the options
regardless of what you think.
The options they've given in this multiple choice poll are very polarizing options.
Yeah.
So it's by responding to the poll, you are forcing your respondents into two extreme boxes that, like,
Yeah.
the makers of the poll have already, with their own preconceived biases, constructed these two polarized options
Yeah, 0
as
or
the
100.
options.
There's no 45.
They excluded any option. Say people thought that it was, you know, maybe a pointless riot that was never actually that dangerous, but it was just kind of a stupid thing that people did. Say someone thought that. There's no option in that poll that fits that view.
Sure. So
There's no option.
they're going to be forced to
They're
select
going to be forced
some
to
polarized version.
Select it's either A, completely horrible, or B, completely good.
Yeah.
There's no in between option.
So I think another interesting example of the sampling bias, if we're going to keep on the political track, back in maybe like 2015, before the 2016 election where Donald Trump gets elected in the U.S. Okay, all of these polls have Hillary Clinton winning by a relatively large margin, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, the general population, these media companies, and most people who you asked would have bet that Hillary was going to win by a relatively healthy margin. Well, we know now that she didn't win. Okay, and I think looking back, you can go, "Oh, why were these polls so off?" Okay, because these polls have not been this off, at least in my understanding, in most presidential elections. Okay, so the polls are designed to sample from a number of different areas. So it's not as if they're just sampling in the cities. It's not like they're just sampling in the country. It's not like they're just sampling one state or another. Okay, they're pretty wide swath polls. I think the difference was there was a certain perception by the general public of what voting for each candidate meant. And as a result, I think many people didn't feel comfortable saying who they were going to vote for if it was for one particular political party, which happened to be that year Republican. So you had a lot of these, let's say, like closeted Republicans.
Or, I mean, here's another thing to consider. And I'm not saying I know the answer to all this. This is complicated. There are a million factors that went into this, I'm sure. But another thing I've heard is, well, all these news outlets were reporting on, the polls have Hillary at 85%. I don't know, whatever it was. That
Sure.
How can you factor in the possibility that people saw that and just got like, oh, this is a landslide? That they didn't even bother going to vote. Like, maybe that was part of it. You're watching it and you're like,
maybe.
oh, it's not even gonna be close. Look at Donald Trump. What, like a bumbling buffoon, right? Like, Hillary's got this in a landslide. Like, that's what all these news outlets are saying. I'm not even concerned the slightest. Who cares? I don't need to vote.
Sure.
Maybe. I don't know.
I think that could be part of it. Another thing that you could say is that as the polls come out showing that Hillary is in some landslide, you're going to get, I'm not wanting to assign positive or negative, but some kind of feedback loop, right? Where people go, everyone around me is voting for this person. I'm the odd person out. So now I don't feel comfortable saying who I'm voting for because I feel like everyone around me thinks otherwise. Right. So now I'm not going to say that. Now when the polls come around, they don't say that, furthering that differential. And by the way,
who knows?
It's probably not any one of these. It's probably some combination of these.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I just think it's really interesting because statistics is one of those things, like, it's math, right? Like, statistics in a lot of ways is math, statistical analysis. I love math. Math is like my favorite school subject, always has been. And statistics is a math subject. But it rides this interesting line between, like, objective mathematics and, like, subjectivity. And you have to be very careful with statistics. You have to look at it with a critical eye. I just think that's really interesting about it because it can be highly subjective. And math is not highly subjective. That's the beauty of math, is that it's an objective field in a lot of ways.
I think statistics is a highly unique mathematical tool that, like any tool, can be used correctly or incorrectly. The asterisk with statistics is that other mathematical tools, it's substantially evident when it's incorrectly applied or used.
Sure.
Statistics, you can incorrectly use it, and it's not necessarily self-evident. And even at times, the correct answer, like with the survivorship bias, even when correctly used, it may seem counterintuitive.
Right. I just think that's
It's a very weird math tool.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like, I just think it's really interesting. Like, it's a very powerful tool, but it's almost like a dangerous tool that you kind of have to watch out for a little bit, because you can be misled by it really easily. You can be led to wrong conclusions. And I think it can also, like, it can be kind of a gateway into, like, weird half-truth areas where maybe you have some level of truth in what you're saying, but you're presenting it in a maybe very biased or polarizing way that can sow confusion in people, or sometimes I think give people maybe a sense of unfounded confidence in, like, unproven conclusions. And because the stats show, right? And people look at statistics sometimes, stats that come out as, like, the holy grail, or like it's written on a stone tablet. Like, well, the stats show this. They don't understand that there's a lot of subjectivity in how you present and gather statistics. And it's not necessarily just black and white. Oh, the stats show. Like, there's a lot that goes into it. And you need to look at that carefully. Like, sometimes in, political discourse these days, people can go back and forth just shouting their own statistics at each other, fully convinced in the objective truth of their side because of the statistics that they have, right? And the conversation goes nowhere. It just goes nowhere as a result.
Yeah.
Because both sides just, like I said before, you could find a statistic that shows or quote-unquote proves just about anything you want.
Yeah.
So you can have a level of confirmation bias.
Yeah.
Even in how you're conducting a statistical study, there can be a lot of confirmation bias. And so you can gather a stat that shows or says anything. And so people do that, and they have this false idea that statistics is objective all the time. So they find a stat, and they throw it out there, say, well, this is an objective truth now. That's not necessarily the case, and you have to be careful with it. Like, well, it's a dangerous tool.
And I think we've been referring to statistics as a tool, and I think that that's the proper way of approaching it. A tool is not helpful in and of itself. A tool is only helpful insofar as you need it to perform a particular action. Okay? Right. So if I just throw some statistic out there, like, oh, the divorce rate's 42%, like, that doesn't help, because what oftentimes happens is you create problems for the tool to resolve in your head immediately. And what that can result in is incorrect application of said statistic. So now you start thinking, oh, about my friend who just got married. That's an incomplete statistic for your friend who just got married. If we want to look at society as a whole and understand the economical impact of divorce on a society, and we're going to look at economic trends and try and correlate that to divorce rate, now that statistic is helpful, right? But if I just throw the statistic out there without us both agreeing on where we're wishing to apply this tool, you conjure up all of these problems for the tool to solve. And they're not necessarily the right thing for it, right? It's like trying to use a hammer on a screw. Like, this is not helpful now.
Yeah.
We were talking earlier about the 2016 election, and I've listened to Eric Weinstein talk about this a little bit. So the term that he uses, and I think is good to know for when we were talking about people not being truthful about what they think on a given topic, like particularly in the polls. The term is helpful to know. It's called preference falsification. So that's when you're outwardly saying something and not actually adhering to that yourself. And I think that happens a lot nowadays, where people want to appear a certain way, and in reality, behind closed doors, when push comes to shove, actually they think something else.
Yeah, or you're doing some kind of self-reported study,
Yeah.
and maybe you're answering how you see yourself or how you want to be.
How you want to see yourself versus how you actually
and this,
are. Yeah.
We could get into,
Sure.
I won't go into it today, but you can get into territory with like personality tests when you have self-reported things. I really think that a lot of times people go into these personality tests and it's unclear to me how often the personality test reflects their true personality versus
how they want to be perceived.
Versus how they see themselves or how they want to be, how they want to see themselves. And that's how they answer the questions. I have never felt confident in my own ability to go through a personality test. They ask you these situations, what would you do in this? Every time I look at it and I just think, well, this is what I think would be the best thing to do. That's not the same thing as this is what I would do in that situation.
You know what?
That's really not the same thing.
You know what this makes me think of? And this is probably gonna like date me. There's a teen dystopian series. I don't remember the series name, but the first book is Divergent. And in the book series, people from a number of different, we'll say, proclivities take a test, and most of the people are not conscious when they're taking the test, and they're run through simulations to see how they react. Okay. Well, there are a subsect of people who are conscious under the test, and as a result, they're able to kind of doctor the test in different ways. And I think that oftentimes applies to the personality test. Like there's a level of consciousness where if you understand what the question is really asking, you're understanding the underlying question behind what is just simply on the page, then you could go through some preference falsification where, oh, now I want to appear this way. Now, I guess it's not preference falsification, that's personality falsification.
I think that's an issue with personality tests, and I could go off about personality tests on its whole own thing, and I won't do that, but I think it's just another example of how you're responding to questions, survey questions. I think sometimes people can say, well, I took this test, I'm an INTJ, like that's what the test said, this is science, like okay, but it's a self-reported test, like there's subjectivity in there for sure. Like this is not solid science. A lot of what we've been talking about here is like we've been talking about a lot of misleading type of statistics or polls or whatever based on, people responding to a survey or that kind of thing. I guess I'll just say it's not only those types of like survey gathered data, public opinion type data that can be misleading. I mean, you can take like, solid data and mislead with that, depending on what samples you choose, what your population is. Are you factoring in all the variables that matter, right? You were talking about the thing with prostate cancer. Like, it's not just self-reported survey type studies that can be misleading or dangerous. Like, statistics as a whole can be. Even if you get something that seems on the surface like, well, how could you be misleading in this? It's just data. This many people had this over this, and it's like, okay, how many people were checked? What were the demographics of the type of people that checked? Like, there's still a lot of ways that those seemingly cut and dry pieces of statistics can be missing information that is critical.
And all of that is assuming that you aren't receiving false flags in the data set.
Yeah.
Due to preference falsification, due to people being able to see through like a previously thought to be double-blind study.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, it's getting late, and kind of continuing on our theme with things on a more macro level. I've been thinking about some of the big corporate scandals that we've had in the past. Things like Enron or Boeing with some of their later plane fiascos. Things like the GameStop stock. All of these things were somewhat nefarious things done by large companies. You know, in the case of Enron, they're fudging a bunch of numbers. In the case of Boeing, they're sending engineering things out that weren't properly disclosed. In the case of GameStop, you had a large number of hedge funds all shorting things to try and, at least in some way, manipulate the market. All of these things were later found out by the public. I wonder how many things weren't. I know that kind of makes me sound like a conspiracy theorist, but I don't think it's crazy to think that, at least when we found some of these things, that there may be some that we didn't find. Well, it's getting late, and perhaps I'm sounding a little bit crazy. Thank you all for listening. Have a good night.